I think that some of these references to Yalta are quite apt in the sense that I believe the president believes in what we call great power relationships, that there should be spheres of influence geographically, and that people who are these big powers decide how things go forward. Now, that is really not in America's national security interest. It may indeed end fighting ultimately, but at an enormous cost where Putin believes he can take more territory, maybe not tomorrow, but in a year or 2 years. President Trump is very close to President Duda of Poland. And quite frankly, Poland is in Putin's sights, as are the Baltics, Moldova. And so there's great concern here, not only for a potential World War III, but for an incremental change of what's on the map and an end to democracy and the rule of law, something we think is important. When I really negotiated with the Russians, trying to stop this invasion, even though we knew it was a fait accompli, we needed to show we could do diplomacy. Every one of the 30 NATO states that met together, along with others, and the Russians at a NATO meeting said how important it was to establish sovereignty, territorial integrity, the right for countries to make their own decisions. So I agree with your reporter. We need to see what came out of this phone call, but we see an administration that is really taking away some of the tools like foreign assistance, like the Voice of America, that we use to make sure that our interests were pursued and not the interests of Russia or China.
Well, Secretary Sherman, as you talk about this notion of sovereignty and territorial integrity against the contrast of President Trump framing this in terms of the division of Ukrainian assets, is there a world in which you realistically think, when all is said and done, Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity as it existed prior to 3 years ago will remain intact?
I can think of some ideas, Kayleigh, but I'll leave it to the negotiators, that would ensure that fundamental principle of territorial integrity. Russia is looking, I believe, for the United States and for the world in the United Nations to declare that some of the territorial gains that Russia has made by its really horrific and illegal invasion of a sovereign country, part of Russia, to name them as part of Russia. I don't think that Ukraine can live with that. I do think there are other solutions. And as I said, smart negotiators know what they are.
The Donbass is, of course, a very different scenario for Ukraine and for Russia. What does that mean in the negotiation?
Well, again, I think in the past, President Zelensky has talked about allowing some form of autonomy as part of Ukraine for the Donbass. We know that there are a lot of Russian speakers. Many people, virtually everyone in Ukraine speaks Russian and Ukrainian, given history. So I think there are a lot of solutions here, but I think the greatest concern for me today is not only that President Trump may give Putin everything he wants and really put Ukraine at risk, but put Europe at risk, and that the president is as well, with the efforts by Elon Musk and Doge, taking away the tools of American power. Those include not only our diplomacy and our strong defense, but it also includes development and foreign assistance and the Voice of America and the ability to do research on cutting-edge technology and cutting-edge technology for the diseases that we all face and the diseases of the future, as well as AI and quantum. And we're seeing our government reduced and our tools reduced in a way that really doesn't help American security. When business goes abroad, they want security. They want assurance. I ran a global consulting firm for over a decade. Started out with Madeleine Albright, called the Albright Group, and then became Albright Stonebridge Group, and now is part of Denton. And I know what business wants, and you cannot achieve that kind of security if you don't have all the tools available as a nation. And those include, I can tell you, China and Russia are thrilled with what the president is doing. It is to our detriment, to the detriment of business, and to the detriment of our national security.
Well, and to continue on this point around other aspects of U.S. involvement abroad, I know you signed on to the amicus brief warning of the danger of terminating foreign aid through USAID. Obviously, some of those programs under Secretary Rubio have been, if not effectively reinstated, will continue to exist. But how much damage already has been done to U.S. soft power with the attempted rollback?
I think enormous damage has already been done. I do think children will die, and Americans are just very generous people, have always been tremendous donors to ensure that children around the world don't die. But it's more direct for Americans. We ensure that disease does not reach our shores. I was around during the Ebola outbreak in West Africa between 2014 and 2016. And I can't begin to tell you the number of conversations I was part of to make sure that Ebola did not reach this country because, as you know, people get on airplanes and they travel. And we didn't want Ebola to come here. So it was in our interest to help Liberia and help Sierra Leone to make sure they dealt with Ebola. And we did that with USAID funds. In fact, we had helped Nigeria train nurses, and 200 Nigerian nurses, if I recall correctly, went to Liberia and Sierra Leone to help stop that outbreak. So in other words, there's a chain of events that helps increase our security. The president talks a lot, as we all understand, about the needs to make sure our borders are secure. He talks a lot about the scourge of violence, of criminal behavior, of cartels, of drug dealing across our border. Well, USAID has provided monies in the past to governments in Latin America and Central America to ensure drug enforcement. Those dollars are now gone, and that puts us more at risk. So this is not just being about generous, which Americans are. This is not just about humanitarian concerns, and Americans are. And the last thing I'll say is American farmers have depended on USAID buying their goods to use abroad. For some farmers, that's easily 20-25% of their business. And so we're hurting American farmers as well. I think it's really important for Americans to understand that these are not dollars that just get thrown away. These are dollars for our national security interests.